The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold. So glad to be with you once again, and we have a great show coming up today. We're going to have Theresa Cheung and Claire Broad appear and talk to us about answers from heaven, incredible true stories of heavenly encounters and the afterlife. And then Barry Downing will be on the program talking about UFOs and the Bible. So a lot of deep topics to go in. I think the show this week clocks in at about 90 minutes or so. So lots of content to delve into this week. I would ask a favor. If you listen on the iPhone or iPad, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts. That's your podcast app on your device. That helps us incredibly, because what happens is that the more subscribers we get, the higher we move on the charts. And the higher we move on the charts, the easier it is for people to find us. Then they listen and hopefully they subscribe. And it's a virtuous circle. But we don't have big marketing budgets. You know, I saw where one of the big public radio companies came out with a paranormal podcast and, you know, it raced up the charts. And then they stopped doing it after Halloween. But guess what? This show has been here since 2005, and if I have anything to say about it, it's going to be here a lot longer. But it's very important that we keep growing, because in this hyper-competitive world of podcasting these days, either you grow or you die. So we need to grow, and the only way to do that is if you hit that subscribe button. So I would really, really appreciate it. Probably 75% of people who listen to podcasts listen to through Apple devices. So that's why we're so intent on that. But there's plenty of room for everybody. If you're on Android, I would recommend Jim Harold Spooky Studio, my app. You can also use that on the Apple devices as well. And that's the way to get all of our content as well. Very convenient, particularly for Android users. Well, I've gone on enough. You've come here to hear some paranormal talk, and that's what we're going to deliver right now. Well, our guests today have a fascinating viewpoint on something that fascinates me. If people listen to me long enough, they know that the thing that I wonder the most about, and I think many of us wonder the most about, is the afterlife. What happens after we cross to the other side? Is there something significant? Is there nothing? And is there any communication back the other way? And these two fine folks will answer that question for us today. They are the authors of the new book, Answers from Heaven, Incredible True Stories of Heavenly Encounters and the Afterlife. I'm talking about Theresa Cheung and Claire Broad, and we're so glad to have them with us today. I think it's going to be a fascinating talk. Theresa was born into a family of psychics and spiritualists. Since leaving King's College, Cambridge University, with a master's in theology and English, she has dedicated her life to the study of the unexplained and writing books to raise spiritual awareness of supernormal potential within ourselves and the world around us, as well as the very real possibility of life after death. The author of numerous best-selling mind, body, spirit books, including 2 Sunday Times top 10 bestsellers, Theresa's books and encyclopedias have been translated into 30 different languages. Claire Broad gave her first message from the spirit world to a relative at the age of 4 and started to develop her ability from the age of 21 with the hope that through cultivating her skills, she might help others and better understand the question of life after death itself. And she has 20 years experience working in various ways, including one-to-one private sittings, public demonstrations, public speaking and teaching, and she's much in demand. We're so glad to have both of them with us. Theresa and Claire, welcome to the program today.
Hello.
Hi, Jim. Hi.
We had
I'd like to meet those two people.
Yeah, I'll tell you. There's something else. I got to talk to them. And I am. It's great. Well, first of all, since you are working together on this project, how did you come together on it and decide to, either of you are capable of doing things individually. Why'd you decide to team up on this?
Because it was almost like, Claire, is it okay if I answer here? I don't want to jump over you. But it was almost like, thank you. It was almost like I had been a researcher, writer about the paranormal for 22 years, but I'm not a practitioner. One of the criticisms of my writing is that, yes, you write about it, you research, but you're not actually in the field practicing. Claire had been a practitioner for 20 odd years, working in the field, but not being able to write about what she does. So it was kind of like two pieces of puzzle, if you see what I mean, that we both kind of realized that we could give each other what the other lacked, if you understand.
Sure. Claire?
Yes, and the interesting thing was that over the last 20 years, I had been receiving messages via other mediums and through my own mediumship from the spirit world telling me that I was going to write for them. And I didn't know how that was going to come about. I heard the message repeated so many times, I'd kind of come to just ignore it and become a bit blasé. And until I received a very accurate message that basically said it was going to be now and that there would be a book coming, that I would have to be online first and learn the science, and that I was to come out of the shadows, put my head above the parapet and step up to the plate, basically. And then a week later, Theresa contacted me from out of the blue, completely saying, I'm a Sunday Times best-selling afterlife author, and I just knew it was there in front of me. This is what I've been getting all my life. I know this is the moment now. So for me, I feel like I'm following a calling or a purpose here, and Theresa has allowed me to do what I feel the spirit world are asking me to do. So it wasn't something I was seeking, but I really do believe that united, our voices are far more powerful, and it's just been a pleasure.
I've been very blessed that I've been able to get lots of books published because of my academic background and my backlog of books. And I know how incredibly hard it is to get published these days if you're a new voice and you're not known. And Claire, like most genuine psychics and mediums, they don't tend to court publicity. They prefer to work quietly because they fear that, sticking their head above the parapet, as Claire said, will pollute their gift. And the reason I invited her is because there have been two criticisms of my work over the years. As I said, one is, where's the science? People say, and the second is, you're not a practitioner. Now, prior to inviting Claire on my page, I decided to tackle the where is the science. And instead of just constantly saying this is about belief, which I had gone in my books, being a spiritualist, and that's my background. Whenever people said, where's the science? I said, well, believe. But I wanted to counter that. And I started to invite scientists on my page who are studying consciousness, the survival of spirit, all these kind of things onto my page, and got phenomenal reaction on Facebook, actually. Incredible. I had the likes of Dean Radin on there, Lloyd Auerbach, people like that, doing 2 to 3 minute videos talking about the science, and the gap between science and spirit is closing. So I felt I was able to provide a really solid anecdote or answer to people who are criticizing me. And then the next hurdle, the practitioners. And that was toughy, because although I work in this field and I believe in it passionately, I have been a bit disillusioned by what I've seen, especially in the field of mediumship. So, and whenever people used to ask me in the past, do I visit a medium? I would actually say, no, I believe in direct contact. You don't need the intermediary. So it was a big step inviting a medium. But first of all, I had to find someone that I actually felt was the real deal, that wasn't doing it for ego, wasn't doing it for money, wasn't a fraud, and was, as we now call Claire, an honest medium. And I went to her demonstrations, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I couldn't believe that this woman wasn't, a mega star in a way, because of the way that the proof that she was bringing and the comfort that she was bringing was just incredibly touching. And then I approached her afterwards and I said, why would you consider a book? And her first reaction was, no, it's not really. I don't think I should do that. But then she had a change of heart, and she thought that spirit was calling her to get this message of survival of consciousness after death out there, and the only way to do that is to voice it. And teaming up with me, it just felt perfect and right. And a lot of people have said that this is perhaps the most powerful book I've written because it's got the voice of a practitioner in it, and a different side of the coin. Because as I said before, I never would recommend mediums, because I had kind of got a bit, even though I'm born in the family of spiritualists, I kind of had got a bit skeptical and cynical about it. And then I met someone I felt was honest. And I also found out that people like Claire are being studied now in the United States, actually in Windbridge Institute, by the lady who wrote the foreword for my book, Dr. Julie Beischel. She's studying people like Claire who work in spiritualist churches, who work quietly behind the scenes, aren't celebrity mediums, but are working quietly behind the scenes. And these mediums volunteer to be tested. It's completely anonymous, and the results she's getting are amazing. And she actually talks about her research in the appendix of our book and has written a lovely foreword. Amazing lady. So it's really three ladies in this book, isn't it, Claire?
It is.
Claire and Dr. Julie Beischel, who's windbridge.org.
And I think that's what makes it.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think that's.
You get a snapshot of our Facebook lives now. People find them funny because we talk over each other.
Well, that just means you've got a lot to say, and you got a dynamic relationship. Claire, you were going to say something?
I just think that that's what makes Answers from Heaven, if you like, unique as a book in this genre, because how many times has a researcher, a scientist, and a practitioner come together as one voice in a book, so that you can receive some upliftment, but also read the science and get some practical advice. It's. I think this is why Theresa and I are just so passionate.
Yeah, about the book.
Oh, that's fantastic.
There's so many of these books are exactly the same. No disrespect to them. They're all lovely, comforting reads. But we wanted to push it further. We wanted to break new ground with this book. And we are. I mean, we've even had the SPR contacting us, haven't we, Claire? And people and scientists and people who didn't believe, saying, this has really opened my mind. Because I'm very aware whenever I write my books that there are a lot of people that are have got very cynical, and I understand that. They don't share my passion for it. And I'm writing for those people as well, to show, just have a look at the science. Listen to what this medium is saying. You don't have to believe her. She's not pushing it down your throat, but just listen to her point of view. Listen to her experience. Read it. And the book also points to lots of other resources as well that we've got in the appendix, doesn't it, Claire? That we've, free gifts from the Institute of Noetic Sciences through me, because I've worked with them before, people like Dean Radin, etc. Claire has done some meditations and guided, visualization exercises to help people. It's a whole universe, this book. It really
is.
Now, when it comes to the book, in talking about after-death communications, how common are they? I think some people think, well, it's 1 in a million. Maybe it happens, but it's very, very rare. Is that a misnomer, or is it more common than we would think?
I've just got to jump in, Claire, then I'll let you. I can say, I talk, in my half of the book, I talk about people who necessarily aren't mediums or psychics, right? Because I have flashes of intuition, but I'm not a medium or a psychic. So I think I'm every man, really, every woman who's fascinated by it, but doesn't necessarily feel they can hear voices or see spirits like Claire can. And I'm telling you, every single one of you will have had a dream of someone who's departed. That is an afterlife communication. You may not realize it, but it is. It is extremely common. We just don't pay attention. And then I'll hand over to Claire, who is the voice of authority.
Claire?
Well, I don't know about that, but I have to say, from 20 years of sitting with people coming into my room, I have lost count of the amount who start a conversation with me along the lines of, I'm not crazy, but I found my way to you because I've had an experience, or I felt my loved ones coming around me, or a family member has said that they have felt my deceased loved one coming around them. I want to see if I can reach out to them and expand upon that communication. I don't think I've ever met anybody who's come to see me anyway who hasn't got a story to tell. So statistically, I can't tell you the science in respect to those numbers, but just from experience, everyone's had that experience. And so this is why I'm really passionate about trying to squash some of the fear and get people to realise that we don't understand what consciousness is, and that it seems that in some way, shape or form, consciousness can survive outside the body, in whatever that is. I'm still open to understanding, and that many people are having that experience. And the only difference between me and those that come into my room to have a reading with me is that I have learned to pay attention to it and learned how to access that more readily than somebody who is just having a sporadic experience, which is what it's like for many people.
Yeah, and as I was saying, we stress in the book, Claire, you don't just suddenly hear voices, and it can happen spontaneously, but Claire has trained for years in the development circle. A lot of people don't understand mediumship is a skill, and like any skill, you have to practice it and develop it. It does not just happen like, you see in the movies. That's not real at all. I mean, as Claire, maybe you say, you had to sit in a circle, didn't you, Claire, and you
I did. I sat for a decade with a teacher every week, learning and basically understanding the mind better, just like a yogi will sit in a temple and learn how to be mindful. At the end of the day, we're talking about consciousness and intelligence, and it's about stilling the analytical mind where the chatter is all the time, and learning to tune into the intelligence within your whole being, which is more of a feeling, knowing. There are two. It seems to be the brain can work in two ways. There is definitely the language and the intellect and the analytical side, and then there is the side of communication that we feel. And most of us don't pay attention to that, and we have to. It's a shame if we were taught this as little kids, I think we'd be better at it. But as the adults that come in around me, I have to teach them to break the habit of being always in the mind, think, and be in the body and feel. And we can all do that. But it does take practice because it's not how we are used to.
As I said, Claire's devoted her life to that. But, you something's got to give. As I said, I've devoted my life to research, writing, academica. You can't do everything,
right?
In this life, maybe and it's a choice. We all have that skill, I think, that Claire has, but she had an affinity with it and chose to develop it. And other people may want it, but they don't really want it because they're not going to put in the hard work. And it is hard work and discipline. I'm sure it was not easy, Claire's mediumship, and she's a fully qualified medium. I mean, I didn't even know that could happen, but it does. As I said, it's like if you want to be you can have a talent for running, but if you don't do the training, you're not going to be Usain Bolt. Right. And I think the same in mediumship.
Makes sense. Quick question.
That's right.
Quick question for you. And I have an example I'm going to ask about. It's a very personal one that happened last week. Now, I think there could be more elaborate afterlife or after death communications, very elaborate, or it can be something simple. And when it's something simple, and I've had this happen multiple times, because I don't think of myself as personally very sensitive, but I always question it. I always say, well, is that really a sign, or is that just a strange coincidence? First of all, I will ask you, are there very kind of simple, brief, 20, 30-second things that happen that are signs from the afterlife, or is that just our imagination?
No, well, I always think that coincidence is the language that heaven speaks for me, and paying attention to them. There's certainly subtle messages from the other side, feelings, moments, glimpsing a feather, a dream, all these things, a name coming up at just the time you're thinking of them, numbers, all these are signs. We just need to pay attention to them. And once you start paying attention to them, the wonderful thing is more of them happen. And you begin to see that you are surrounded by signs.
Claire?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's sometimes, it is a fleeting moment because we're distracted all the time in our busy lives with technology going off here, there. Those moments when you may actually have a moment of stillness is when suddenly some moment of inspiration comes in, or you may hear something. It's very interesting that a lot of people report hearing their loved ones actually speak to them in the early hours of the morning when the brain is in a completely different state of awareness, and it's definitely about how active we are. So sometimes if there is a moment, that moment is seized upon and it is fleeting and quick.
Well, I'll give you my example, and it's kind of strange. Last week, I was on a cruise with the other paranormal oriented speakers, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Micah Hanks, Matt Oakley.
Fabulous.
And it was a lot of fun. And as part of this, we had presentations. Rosemary gave a presentation. Micah gave a presentation. I gave a presentation. They had a beautiful little conference room, and it was set off of all places from the casino. So one of our participants, to get coffee or something, you had to walk through the casino. I'm sure that was by design. But anyway, so we finished our morning sessions, and then we had a break, and then I was going to go get a cup of coffee. And I was walking through the casino, and one of the attendees was playing one of these claw machines that you try to pick up various things and win. I don't know if you have them over there in the UK, but they're kind of, let's say the odds aren't that great. But anyway, so this one was for money. But my late uncle, who I was extremely close to, he was like my second father, and he passed away a few years back. And I just looked at that claw machine and I said, oh, I wish John were here. He would love this so much. He would just be having a ball, because he would be the kind of person who would spend $10 to win a 98-cent toy just for the challenge of it. So, because I don't know, just something about it, the competition appealed to him. So I just thought John would really love that. And I didn't walk 3 steps until this lady shouts out, John. What do you think? What do you think?
That's a sign for me.
Absolutely. I think that it's like when people see robins or feathers, your logical mind can say, well, a bird may have just dropped a feather or whatnot.
Right.
But I believe what happens is that the spirit world, as your thoughts went out there around your uncle and he wanted to respond, he managed to either inspire that lady to say that then, or draw your attention to it. He's blending with your mind, just like if you suddenly get drawn to seeing a feather on the floor or a robin outside. What took you at that moment to see it, just as you were thinking? Those thoughts, that it's that you're paying attention to. Yeah.
Yeah, it was remarkable to me because she was obviously calling somebody else in her party to come over. And, but the fact that it was engineered in such a way that, that it was literally, I looked over at the gentleman playing the claw machine. Nice guy, by the way, if he's listening, Tim. And anyway, I went 2 steps, and this woman says, John. Now, again, it could be a coincidence, but man, what a coincidence.
Yes, but as I said, there's no coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe it's the language that spirit speaks. It's paying attention to it, and you did pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And you received a feeling of, I bet you received a feeling of comfort from it.
Yes, absolutely.
And that comfort is heaven.
Yeah, that's great.
It's giving us a reassuring sign. I don't understand why we don't get more obvious ones, but it's all for a reason. And one day we will find out. But right now our journey is to evolve and to know that our departed loved ones are walking unseen beside us. And
I can tell. Sorry, I can tell you, because I've had some obvious ones, that even when you get obvious ones, you still second guess it.
Exactly. I had one that saved my life on a road. And years later, I still think, did I make that up? I heard a voice telling me to take the right path. If I'd taken the left path, I would have, I don't know if I'd be here today. But I think at the time, was that in my mind? Because my mother always used to tell me, take the right path. She had this thing that was, you always she used to say it so much. We have phrases that are associated with people. Mm-hmm. And it just popped into my mind at exactly the right moment to divert me from somewhere. And things like that, you do second guess them, even when they're obvious.
You do. I think a spirit person could be standing in front of you telling you, here I am. And you would think, am I dreaming? Am I awake? Right. What's going on here? We would explain the whole thing away, because culturally we are being taught from a young age, this isn't possible. And it is possible. It's just, it's a different form of reality. Just like, I'm sitting at a table right now. I'm touching that table. That table is material, and that's how I'm feeling it, as solid. And yet we know it isn't solid.
Right.
So my awareness is existing my perception is existing in two different realities all at once. I am in two different realities. I'm in a reality when I'm in my sleep state, and the spirit world or consciousness is another reality. Our bodies are full of trillions of cells that we're not aware of, but there's another reality. And just because our senses or our brain isn't tuned in to perceive that doesn't mean it's not there. And it doesn't mean there aren't moments of time when we become aware of it. Just as you can look through a microscope and become aware of it, or realize, for instance, like me, I'm losing my voice, that there's something going on with the cells in my body right now. That, these things happen and we would just dismiss it. And that's what Theresa and I are really trying to change, is just the perception opens you up to a new universe and does bring you comfort and does help bring you strength and joy in life. And to be honest, a lot of people say to me, oh, why are you so focused on death? I'm not. I'm focused on life. To me, this is about empowering people to make the most of their life and live it without the fear and with more joy. That's what it is for me.
Hence the cover. We chose sunflowers. It's bright and vivid. We wanted our cover to be so different from every other book about spirits and the afterlife out there. We chose a field of sunflowers to show that heaven is vibrant, heaven is alive, and that there is no death.
And the funny thing is that since that's happened, I'm seeing sunflowers everywhere.
Yes.
So just like you're John, now people are turning up, and I've, like, my client this week had a sunflower tattoo all up her arm. They just, I never saw them before, but there they are. They're in front of me everywhere now. So I just keep thinking, there you go. I mean, you can't ignore it.
We do, and there is. We live in a cynical age, and everybody's material science. But Claire is booked over a year in advance. Whenever we recently did a bookshop talk, didn't we, Claire? It was absolutely packed.
Mm. Well, I think people
are fascinated.
Yeah, people are fascinated, but I don't think they want to say it in quote polite company. I think that people are way more interested than they let on. But it's like, this stuff and I'm like, oh, really?
Well, I found putting a medium on my Facebook page, it hurt me in terms of followers and the criticism, because I've never done that before. You see, it was quite a big thing for me to do, to say, actually, I think there might. I mean, sometimes I wonder. I'm saying I doubt too, but to put a medium on my page was a big thing, and to say I think there's something there. This lady is the real deal. Go and see her demonstrations. Have a look at what she's saying. Read the book. Hear her story. And it took a while for people to sort of get over that word medium, and show them that actually it's not. It's just talking about consciousness and the survival of consciousness after death, isn't it, Claire? That's what we're talking about here.
That's it. It's not about a particular person. It's never about the messenger. It's always about the message, and I can offer a certain perspective, and I wouldn't want anyone to believe me. I want people to come and find out for themselves. Do these cruises like you've been on, Jim. Come and get hands on and find out for yourself. Don't just take the top line from our culture. Find out for yourself, because
people
it's liberating.
Are so quick to judge and have an opinion. You're saying, there's things like it's a load of rubbish. There is no life after death. And Claire and I just turn around and say, well, okay, how do you know?
Yeah, that's
how do
true.
you know? How can they say with such authority?
Exactly.
What makes them an authority of knowing the ultimate truth?
Exactly.
We are all groping in the dark to a certain extent.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here, and we're trying to get these answers together on the Paranormal Podcast. We'll be back right after this with Theresa Cheung and Claire Broad. We're talking about answers from heaven right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And as we've been telling you, you can get your first month for only 99 cents. And what a great time to give yourself the gift of Gaia, because, with the holidays coming, everybody is going to be getting new devices. Maybe you're getting a new television. Maybe you're getting a new smartphone, a new tablet, perhaps a Roku or an Apple TV unit. And the thing is that it's great to have those, but then you need to have something to put on them. And for my money, Gaia, for people listening to this show, this should be your number one choice for a streaming service this holiday season, because it has the topics we love. And you can watch Gaia on all of those devices, newer ones that you've already owned. There's Apple TV, Roku, your iPhone, your iPad, your Chromecast, your Android devices, your Fire TV, your computer. If you're listening to me, you can watch Gaia. And the Gaia difference is this. They create their own original productions, which are fantastic and have great, great people behind them, on camera and behind the camera. And then in addition, they go out and they find the best third-party content about the topics we love. They bring it in, and what a great cornucopia it is. And every week, and this is the thing, it's not kind of like this stationary library of content, which would be nice, but they're always upping their game and adding new things. For example, this week, Season 9 begins for Cosmic Disclosure with David Wilcock and Corey Good. And this week, Corey is going to be talking about the guide to non-terrestrial beings. He steps out on his own in this program to introduce us to the various extraterrestrial species he has encountered in his years with MyLab and secret space programs. We'll view an artist's depiction of these beings, including the Nordics, Greys, insectoids, reptilians, and ebons. Fascinating stuff. Then, Beyond Belief with George Norrie, one of my favorite hosts, and one of my favorite guests, actually. Andrew Collins is going to be joining George to talk about Göbekli Tepe, Portal to the Universe. Now, he's going to explore the alignment of this fantastic archaeological site with the constellation of Cygnus. And as they examine the stone spires, they'll see that they may open a portal connecting Earth with celestial realms. And there's so much more. Hollywood Decoded, where they talk about symbolism in Hollywood. This week they're going to be looking at Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock, The Sun and DNA Activation. Deep Space Season 2, Martian Refugees. Open Minds with Regina Meredith, Blavatsky's Influence on Occult America, and so much more. I think that you will enjoy it. Really, there's nothing like it. It's like a video buffet for the topics we love. So, step one, go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. Step two, watch some of the videos that we've put there so you can get a feel for it. No cost for that whatsoever, no obligation. And you'll see the kind of great content that Gaia produces. And then step three is sign up for your first month for only 99 cents. Come on, guys. You've been good this year. You don't deserve a lump of coal in your stocking. You deserve Gaia. Give it to yourself. Give it a try. 99 cents. It's fantastic. And as I've said, particularly in the last few weeks, Gaia helped us through a tough year here. We had been making a lot of changes, and there were a lot of costs incurred and things. And with Gaia, it would have been without them, it would have been very, very difficult. But they support the show. I want you to support them and say, hey, Gaia, I appreciate you supporting Jim and the Paranormal Podcast, and by extension, everything else we do. And we're going to give you a try as a thank you. Do that, and do it for yourself, because you're thanking them, and then you're going to thank yourself because you're going to say, wow, why didn't I try Gaia sooner? Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Today, the topic, Answers from Heaven, Incredible True Stories of Heavenly Encounters and the Afterlife. Our guests are the authors of said book, Theresa Cheung and Claire Broad. And since this talks about incredible true stories, is there one that either of you would like to share with us today as a favorite?
I'll start. I mean, my favourite stories actually fall in the category of the very gentle signs. Typically, one in particular of a woman who was at the funeral of her mother, was missing her terribly, and was starting to regret that she hadn't seen the dead body of her mother. Although she remembered her mother had always said, "Don't look at my dead body, remember me alive." And she was starting to regret it because she missed her so much. And then she felt a kiss on her cheek. That kind of story. And she knew it was her mother, and she just suddenly felt at peace. And I love those stories where there's great anxiety and then something supernatural, paranormal happens. And it's so subtle, a gentle breeze, a feeling of being kissed on the cheek or a hand held. It changes everything. And there's comfort and healing that allows them to move through their grief with the strength of knowing that somewhere, somehow, their departed loved one is alive within them and around them. I love those stories like that. They're my top favourite. My second favourite are the near-death experience stories, which I never tire of reading. I'm a bit of a junkie there. Every time I get a near-death experience, I devour them for details about heaven, and I kind of build up a picture from them of what heaven or the afterlife would be like. But they're also different, but they're also similar as well. So that's me.
Claire, do you have a favorite?
I'm trying to pick out of two, but I'll go with the one that I think is probably more relatable to everybody, and that's the one where when I was 4, I heard my granddad speak to me. And the reason why that story is so important to me is that at that age, I had no need to believe in an afterlife. I hadn't even built a relationship with my granddad up particularly, because he was 3 when I died. And I had no need to hear from him. And yet I was standing in a cemetery playing with stones and a vase and water, whilst my mum and my nan were tidying up his plot. And much like what you were saying, how your thoughts went out, I believe their thoughts went out to him, because they were obviously taking care of his area in the cemetery. And whilst I was playing, I heard and felt my granddad come around me, and he was saying, "Claire, tell Nanny Granddad says I love you, Ive." And it was such a simple message. But what sticks really with me is the fact that I thought, no, I'm not saying that. I'm busy playing. I just was slightly irritated, and it came again with such force. "Claire, please tell Nanny Granddad says I love you, Ive." So I stood up, delivered the message. And my mum and my nan, I remember them standing at a gateway there in the cemetery, just absolutely dumbfounded, because my nan went on to explain to me many years later, as she never forgot this story, that she only went by the name of Connie because she didn't like her name Ivy. And most people I ever knew, I heard call her Connie. My mum obviously called her mum. I called her Nanny. And only my granddad called her Ive. And so she just knew that that was a moment in time from the past that I couldn't know about, and that he must be there letting her know. And besides that, how many children of that age say something like that? It's not on their minds to want to make their family feel better. They don't have the depth of maturity of emotion to need to do that, or feel, well, I know that would be a nice thing to say. There was just so many layers to it that now as an adult, whenever I feel like I'm questioning everything, or have the skeptics got it right, or have I got this wrong, I always go back to that moment, because it stuck with me. It was so unusual. It stuck with me even as a child, and so that's got to be my favourite one. But there are so many unbelievable and comforting stories. I could share loads.
And that's why people should buy the book.
Yeah,
because they will get loads. There, didn't I do well?
Hearing.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. But as you can hear with Claire talking, the honesty. And I said I've heard of her demonstrations that sometimes when people they've come, they bought the tickets, are sitting there, and she'll just say, "I have to have a refund because nothing's coming through." That is an honest medium that's not going to perform if she doesn't feel that there's a connection. And that's very rare.
And that's appreciated.
I think
get that throughout her book. You hear the honesty, and that she actually would love science to explain what on earth is going on. And she says to me, my life would be so much easier if I didn't have this. And I'd also like to say something else about Claire. She had a very successful career in advertising. She's a happily married mother of 2. There's absolutely no reason for her week in, week out to do demonstrations in churches, whatever, because it's certainly not about the money, because there is no income in this. It's a vocation and a calling. And that was what I was looking for. People doing this because it is their calling.
And as much as I've had so many experiences in my life now, I know something's going on. I think the minute that we say we know exactly what it is and we take a position on it, we've lost that in the best spirit of inquiry, if you like. None of us know outright exactly what's going on. We can say, based on our experience, this is our beliefs, this is a knowing for me. I know something is happening here that is unexplained. I have no doubt in that, and I believe that life goes on totally. It's a knowing for me, but I wouldn't say I know exactly what that is, or that I get it right all the time, or that there may well come a time when science explains something and I can think, oh, so that's why I thought that. That hasn't happened yet. So I hope that I am honest, and that the honesty is in trying to show that this is an everyday person's experience. This isn't about me. It goes beyond that. This is about us as humanity and what we haven't understood yet. That's what this book is about.
Now, a couple of more questions before we close out, because these are things I think people are incredibly curious about. One is how difficult do you think it is for them to communicate from the other side? Is it relatively tough for them, or is it we just don't pick up the signs?
Oh, it is tough.
I would think it's tough, but I think we make it easier for them by being open-minded and receptive and having loving feelings. I don't know whether I'm right there, Claire, that if we're feeling warm and receptive to it, that it's easier.
Yes. I think that love is the bridge between the two worlds. So wherever there's a bond of love, then that strength, you think about a mother trying to help her child, that strength of bond is going to make you try that bit harder to achieve something. And I also think it's very hard for them, because if we don't learn how to shift our awareness and enter into an altered state of awareness, it becomes very difficult for them to crack that nut and get heard. It could be easier for them, but we make it harder. And also there's the thing of the fact that some people, just because they're in the spirit world, doesn't make them all seeing, all knowing all of a sudden. They're very much how they were before. And perhaps they weren't natural communicators or didn't find it easy to open up and explain themselves. And it doesn't always come natural for them from that side of things. There are so many factors that can make it not work or work for a bit and falter. It's not a perfect process, and I know that it's difficult for them, which is why they come in dream state and things like that.
Near-death experiences show me that when people cross over, they don't instantly become all-seeing and all-knowing. They continue on the journey. I mean, the afterlife, you continue. It's constant evolution. It's not like when you pass over, suddenly, I get everything now. They're busy too, evolving. That is what this eternal life is. It's constant evolution. That's what I've gathered from my research. I'm looking at from a researcher's perspective. The theme that comes through for me time and time again, alongside love, of course, is growth, evolution. And that continues on the other side. We don't get a break from the learning. It goes on. It's not just floating around, I think, in perfect bliss and happiness. I don't know.
That was you
learning and growing.
Yeah, you anticipated my next and final question. What is and it could be different, it could be the same. What are your perceptions of what you think the other side is like? The title of the book is Answers from Heaven. So I assume from that you think heaven is a place. And then there's that other place that people talk about, which I'll be curious to see if you think there's a place like that too. But I'll start. And then
What
do you think happens? Where do you think we go?
Well, I think we grow to heaven. We don't go to heaven for a start. And I think that heaven is very much one that you're creating with your thoughts and feelings right now. So the heaven you're going to is one that you're creating with your thoughts, your words, and your actions. That's where I think we go. And that's why every moment is sacred. Every moment we are creating our own heaven or our own hell. And that's what I believe heaven is from what I've learned and researched. And I think the learning goes on. And I think if you have done harm to others or injured others or been dishonest, or you will feel what other people felt. That is how heaven teaches and helps us grow. That if you have been a terrible person and done terrible things, it's not punishment, it's kind of education. You will feel the suffering you have caused. That's another thing, because a lot of people ask what happens with bad people when they go to heaven and all that. It's a feeling state. You will feel the feelings that you caused other, and that is the most terrible thing to go through. But it's evolution again. That's how I feel it. So if your thoughts and your feelings are positive and inspiring and loving, you are actually creating your heaven, your afterlife right now. That's how I see it.
Claire?
Yes. I mean, everybody wants to know, don't they? And in the book, I talk about how I met a spirit teacher that's been with me all my life, and that one day I asked him to tell me what it's like where he is. And he basically said that they call it the summer lands where he is, and that it is so vibrant and full of life that everything from the plants to even the buildings of residence that they have there, they are so in tune with that everything has a life that vibrates through it, that they are aware of everything in a way that we can't be here, and therefore words cannot describe the beauty of it. But that heaven is a state of being and not a destination. That in the spirit world there are many realms, and that we work our way through them based on our understanding and evolution of spirit. And so he exists in something of the summer lands, but that's not a given right for us all. It very much is how where we're at within ourselves, which is why heaven can be had here in this life, and heaven can be had in the next life, or not. I don't believe in heaven and hell of the Bible, but it seems to be that heaven is to do with your state of mind and well-being, and therefore there must be, so I hear anyway from messages I get, layers, realms, dimensions where people aren't in heavenly states of bliss all the time. And nor would I want that, actually. I can't think of anything more boring than just to exist forever in a state of perfection. I don't think any of us want that.
I mean, every day we are born anew. The person you were yesterday has died, but you go on as the person you are today. And physical death is exactly the same. You're just going into another state of being. We're constantly, every day, we are shedding old selves. And heaven is just another big leap forward. That's how I see it. Because I often ask people, when you go to heaven, do you see yourself there as a child, as an old person, as you are today? Think about that concept. All those versions of you have gone, but you still go on. It's the you that's external, that you can step outside yourself. That's what goes on after death. But, physical death, losing the physical, the material, is something that scares a lot of people. And we hope that this book will take some of the fear, the sting out of death, and show that it ends a life, not a relationship. And that some aspect of us, whatever that is, goes on.
Well, the important question at this point is how can people get the book and connect to everything you both do?
I'll leave that to you, Claire. You're good at that.
Okay, so the book is available on Amazon. It's on Kindle in the US, and it's in paperback in the UK. And you can get hold of me. I'd love people to come and join me on my Facebook page, which is at Medium Claire Broad, because
it's brilliant, that page, by the way. It's a real community of people there who are asking questions and interacting with Claire, because she gets back to everyone. Within reason, she does get back to everyone. And there's a real sense of community on that page. I
Yeah,
thoroughly
it's about opening the dialogue and getting people talking about this and sharing these experiences that I said to you. Everybody's always got a story, just not having a place to go where you don't have to feel silly. And also you can have a look at my website, which is www.clarebroad.com.
And I'm www.theresachung.com, and I also have my Theresa Cheung author Facebook page where you can see the very first videos when I invited Claire on my page. And her videos actually proved more popular than mine, how she started. And she was like, oh, I don't want to do a video. And I just said, just talk about what it's like being a medium. People want to hear about this. And you can, if you go through my video library, you can see her even
have a laugh.
And now she's just a pro. She's just so good at them. But it was funny in the beginning, the sort of the camera angle wrong and everything.
Well, we all go through that. Believe me, I have more than one video or recording that I would rather not see the light of day.
I was scrolling down the other one, and I saw my first video was just the top of my head talking. I mean, I just don't know what I was doing. I just feel my forehead, and I think, how could I?
Well, it's been a delightful conversation. Our guests have been Theresa Cheung and Claire Broad. The book is Answers from Heaven, Incredible True Stories of Heavenly Encounters with the Afterlife. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Two delightful guests with one of my favorite subjects, one that is personally very resonant with me. And next up is Barry Downing. We are going to talk about UFOs and the Bible. Right now, the idea of ancient aliens is very, I don't know if hip is the right thing to say, but it's very popular. It's a very popular idea. And also the idea that possibly some of the things we read about in the Bible are attributable to aliens. Many people espouse that these days, but I have on the line a gentleman who had that theory way back, and we're so glad to have him on the line. I'm talking about Reverend Barry Downing, and he wrote the book The Bible and Flying Saucers back in 1968. But he is still very active today, and he just has a recent book out called Biblical UFO Revelations. Did Extraterrestrial Powers Create Ancient Miracles? And he's a great guest and really has a very deep background. He holds a PhD in the relation between religion and science from the University of Edinburgh of Scotland. He also has a BA in physics from Hartwick College and a degree from Princeton Theological Seminary. He's been a pastor. He has also served as a consultant in theology to MUFON since 1972, and he is on the International Board of Directors for the Fund for UFO Research. The book is Biblical UFO Revelations. Did Extraterrestrial Powers Cause Ancient Miracles? Reverend Downing, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jim. Glad I can be here.
So let's go back to the 60s. I've got to imagine that at the time, I still think that these theories are controversial with many people, but they had to be really controversial when you talked about them in the late 1960s. What was that like? What was the climate and what was the reaction?
Okay, the reaction was pretty negative from anybody in the field of religion. Okay, conservative Protestants hated me because I seemed to get rid of the supernatural. Liberal Protestants hated me because I took the parting of the Red Sea seriously and things like that, and thought they really happened instead of seeing them as myth. Catholics were a little kinder to me than Protestants, and I'm a Protestant, So, but at the same time, I didn't get any ringing endorsements from Catholics, but when my book was reviewed by a Catholic priest in Boston in the paper, he felt mine was the best of the books that were trying to deal with the subject, so that was decent of him. I would say in the UFO field, Donald Kehoe was one of the sources I used. Frank Edwards' Flying Saucer Serious Business is another source. Jacques Vallée had just published his first book, so he was just getting his toe in the water. And insofar as people believed UFOs were real, kind of the speculation was maybe they came from Mars, because that's not too far away. You hadn't really had enough advancement in understanding modern physics to appreciate the fact that maybe the UFOs could come from almost anywhere and not take very long to get here, meaning that, books like Michio Kaku's book, Parallel Worlds, that hadn't come out yet. It didn't come out for years,
Right.
And so the understanding that for modern physics, there may be multiple universes, there might be other universes right in the midst of us if you could change dimensions. None of that was here yet. So although I dealt with that in Chapter 5 in my book, Chapter 5 is Where is Heaven, and I dealt with the possibility of another dimension. That wasn't taken very seriously by any reviewers either, but it's looking better now.
Now, it's interesting to me, you mentioned something there. Now, conservative Christians, I could see, I'm not surprised that they would come out against you. But liberal Christians, that was an interesting thing because they have problems with the idea that there really were real miracles. It wasn't just a parable. It just wasn't a kind of a fairy story, that real miracles did happen.
Yeah, it's not just that they happened, but actually they don't like the idea of a God that would do that. Let me read you a section from John Shelby Spong. He's an Episcopal bishop, Why Christianity Must Change or Die. God is first called God's only Son. Jesus is called God's only Son. Does this mean that none of the rest of us are or can be the son or daughter of God? That kind of exclusive claim has been made throughout the ages with great power by the Christian church. It is part of our religious mentality. No matter how limited or ungodlike it makes God seem to be, this phrase also seems to suggest that none of the other religions, systems of the world can offer a people a point of connection with the divine. Many Christians have also made exactly the same claim, and it is, in fact, for creatures have been to feel a quite unholy attitude of religious imperialism. So he doesn't like the idea that the Jews are God's chosen people, that Jesus is God's chosen son, all this kind of stuff he's against. And any miracles that would support that, he's against too. In terms of the parting of the Red Sea, but in the same time, the sacred text that the Red Sea also closed by this God just in time to drown the hated Egyptians, and that the sun was finally allowed to set as soon as the slaughter of the wicked Amorites was complete. What kind of almighty power is this? Is it even ethical? Is one capable of worshiping so capricious a deity who appears to embody the worst of our human tribal and political hatreds? So this is a Christian bishop, and so he's not exactly supporting the Bible, and he's not hoping that any of these miracles happened. They make his view of God calls it into question.
And I'm going to say something somewhat controversial because I don't really get into religion a lot, or politics on the shows. But I do consider myself of the Christian faith, even though we talk about ghosts and all kinds of things. But I'll say this, some of the things there that he doesn't believe, I mean, if you don't believe those things, by definition, are you a Christian? I mean, if you kind of believe them or you don't.
You would think so. But I think he's trying to react to the kind of situation we have now, where think of Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, and you've got scientists like Dawkins who say things like this about the God of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Notice he says fiction doesn't exist, but jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, and vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infantile, genocidal, etc. Those of us schooled from infancy in this ways can become desensitized to their horror. So, in an age where the scientific worldview prevails, and the kind of things like the parting of the Red Sea sounds very unscientific, why buy into that version of God at all? I think that's where it is. And it comes either from secularists like like Richard Dawkins, or from religious leaders like Bishop Strong, who were trying to sound scientific enough in the point of view that he can do some religious stuff, even if he doesn't use the Bible to do it.
So your own personal journey with this, I mean, studying theology at a very high level, studying physics, when did you start to think Bible, UFOs, and aliens? There might be a connection here. Can you talk about that process in your own mind?
Sure. When I was in seminary, I was taking a class on Christian doctrine, and the professor said, "No one today believes in the ascension of Jesus, do they? And if he did not ascend, where is his body? We may only suppose his bones lie buried somewhere in the Middle East." It said to me, he doesn't believe in the resurrection. This means we don't have Easter. That just leaves us Christmas. What have you got if all you got is a baby in a manger, So I felt that if I was going to do a funeral and say, okay, Aunt Tilly lies here, and we're going to miss her. In the old days, we used to believe she had gone to be with God, but we know better now because we're scientifically oriented. And so Aunt Tilly's done. Too bad, but we'll get over it, That didn't sound like the kind of funeral I wanted to do. So I went out to the University of Edinburgh to study the relation between science and religion. Ended up doing my dissertation on Isaac Newton. And during the third year of studies, I started thinking that we're in the space age. We're close to it. We were getting a rocket ready to go to the moon. And I thought, what might be the relation between angels in the Bible and our modern views of space, and maybe space beings if they're out there? So I started just looking at the Bible, not really expecting I'd find all that much. And then in the Old Testament, I found that the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night was absolutely critical UFO that is involved from almost the beginning to the end of the Exodus. And I thought, oh my goodness, what do we have here? So I was my third year of PhD studies. I was very excited about the possibility that something important was here, but I didn't want to quit my dissertation right in the middle of it, so I kind of made a deal with God. If I finished my dissertation, as soon as I got done, I'd write a book dealing with this. And so that's how it went. I finished my dissertation in May of '66, came home, didn't have a church, didn't have a job yet. So I set up shop in my in-laws' basement in Rochester, New York, and started writing the Bible and Flying Saucers. And had it finished by about February 1st, 1967, and sent it out. It was rejected 2 or 3 times, but finally accepted by Lippincott in June of '67 and published in April of '68. So that's how it went.
Now, the idea that Jesus was an extraterrestrial, is that accurate to say that that is your working theory?
Well, it's what he says in John's Gospel. Here's John's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 38 forward. "For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that all that are given to me, none should be lost, but that I should raise them up on the last day." So that's the Christian message in a nutshell. Jesus came from the heavenly world. After his resurrection, he returned to the heavenly world from which he'd come, and he basically preached the message and said, everybody that buys into this, when you die, you get raised in the next world. That's how it is. He makes other comments. These are mainly in John, such as before Abraham was, I am. He claims a pre-incarnation identification. He at one point talks about he's talking to a crowd about the manna that fed the Jews in the wilderness, and he said, you ate the manna in the wilderness and died, but if you eat the true bread which come down from heaven, you shall have eternal life. So he self-identifies as having had a life before coming to earth, as well as a life now that he's gone away from earth. So yes, in that sense, I see him as an extraterrestrial. I don't see him as necessarily like E.T. that just kind of flew down here in a spaceship and ran around with a bunch of children for a while and jumped back in the ship and went away. It's not like that. But rather, it was a divinely planned event and seen as part of what I would call the overall process of the human race going from being what it is, namely flesh and blood plus spirit, to another level beyond this world.
One thing that occurs to me that some Christians might think by the idea that Jesus is an E.T. is that somehow minimizes who and what Jesus is. How would you respond to that concern?
I'd say it certainly does sound that way. Part of the response would be that Jesus is willing to be minimized. That's the point of the crucifixion. The humility of God is part of the message of the New Testament faith. So, it minimizes God. If you want God to be kind of a big thumper who main characteristic is blasting people with nuclear weapons or something, then maybe Jesus is not for you. But if you're interested in a God who in humility is born in a manger, who in humility spends his time not with the rich and famous, but with the poor and downtrodden, and who ends up being crucified by the political authorities and religious authorities of his time, then maybe Jesus is for you.
A very interesting perspective. Our guest is Reverend Dr. Barry H. Downing, and we'll be back right after this. Hey, I wanted to tell you about two things that I think that you might enjoy this time of year. One is a gift possibly for somebody else, or the other is a gift for yourself. And I'm talking about my Campfire books and my Paranormal Plus Club. Now let's start with the books. If you're new to these parts, you may not even know that I have 5 Campfire books out compiled from the best stories that we've ever had on the show. Each one has been a Kindle Supernatural bestseller, and I hope that you'll check them out. Now, you can get them in ebook on a Kindle. You don't even need a Kindle anymore to read a Kindle book. You just need a smartphone app to do that, the free Kindle app. Or if you're old school and like the Dead Tree version, you can check out my actual physical books. Now, how do I do this? Now, you can always go to Amazon and search directly for Jim Harold's Campfire, or you can make it easy and just go to jimharoldbooks.com. That's jimharoldbooks.com. Harold, by the way. And that'll take you to a page on my website where you have all the handy-dandy links there for both the US and the UK. So I hope that you will check it out. I think it's a great gift if you know somebody who loves the spooky, but they've not really ever tuned into a podcast. This is a way to share the Campfire love. That's at jimharoldbooks.com or on Amazon. Also, we have an adult Campfire coloring book you may not be familiar with, and you can check that out in those same places as well. It's a lot of fun. Secondly, I wanted to mention something that might be a good gift for yourself. If you're listening to the Campfire, you know that there are many, many more episodes of the Campfire that are not available on the free feed. And you may say, Jim, how can I access all of these classic Campfires? Well, there's one way to do it, and that's the ability to be a part of my Paranormal Plus Club. Now, we did a major upgrade this year. We have our Spooky Studio app, and now you can easily consume the content, which before it was I had to log in and do all these different things. Now you can listen right on our smartphone app. Now, what do you get if you are a member of my Paranormal Plus Club? Now, keep in mind, we're always adding new stuff, but as of December 1st, here's what you get. You get access to 314 episodes of The Campfire that are no longer available on the free feed. So you can go all the way back to 2009 and listen to all that stuff. Then you get access to 494 episodes of the Paranormal Podcast going all the way back to 2005. That you can't listen to now, okay? Then you get access, you can't listen to on a free side, I should say. I'm kind of vamping the spot, so Crime Scene. Okay, That is now a free podcast, but only the most recent ones. So you can go back and listen to 120 episodes of that you can't listen for free at this point. Now, but wait, there's more, as they say. Ghost Insight, 83 episodes, plus only, have never been free. UFO Encounters, 125 episodes, plus only, have never been free. The Other Side, the Metaphysical Podcast, 178 episodes that have never been free. Conspiracy Corner, 108 episodes that have never been free. We just did a great one on the JFK situation yesterday, just released it. Ancient Mysteries on the Air, we talk about ancient astronauts and the Great Pyramids and all of that, 34 episodes. And then The Cryptid Report, 13 episodes. That's our newest exclusive Paranormal Plus podcast. Then, what else do you get? Well, we have an archive of interactive plus webinars, 30 plus hours of on-demand content that you can watch from the app. Plus, we have more live events coming in 2018. We're actually in discussions with our first speaker of the year, so we're going to have more of those coming up. Now, what have people said that they joined this new Plus Club? Stuart said, adore the new app, much more convenient to listen to Plus shows on road trips. Lisa said, I can't even begin to tell you how much I love your new app. As a Plus Club member, it's like Christmas to have all of this content. And then Alejandra said, it is so easy to navigate and look for what you want to listen. Love the new app, Jim. It has sure made my experience much more enjoyable in regard to the Plus Club. So we are so thankful. We hope you'll check it out this holiday season as a gift to yourself for 2018. It's at jimharoldplus.com, jimharoldplus.com. And how do you access it? You just click on the blue banner at jimharoldplus.com, and they'll show you how you can sign up for either a month or a year. So I hope that you will check it out. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll check out the books and my Paranormal Plus Club. Happy holidays. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Dr. Reverend Barry H. Downing. He is the author of multiple books, the most recent one being Biblical UFO Revelations. Did extraterrestrial powers cause ancient miracles? And we're talking about the idea of UFOs and the Bible. Now, Reverend Downing, talk to us about some of the miracles in the Bible, some examples, and how they might have been executed by an alien race.
All right, let's start with the pillar cloud and fire of the Exodus. Anybody who's following with the Bible, look at Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 and 22. The setting is that the Jews have just come out of Egypt after Passover. Passover is the last plague that came upon the Egyptians, and Pharaoh finally gave in and let Israel go. And they're met by a pillar cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The pillar of fire by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people, meaning for the whole 40 years of the Exodus journey. Now, what is a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night? If you go to your interpreter's Bible, which most pastors have, it's a 12-volume set that discusses every book in the Bible, and look at Exodus 13, 21, and 22, and you look to see what it says this thing is, what they say it is a myth, meaning that it's something the Jews made up to make them feel good about having God with them on the journey. And then in the interpretive section, somebody suggests maybe they saw a volcano with smoke going up during the day and it glowed at night, the smoke or whatever. However, think about modern UFOs, many of which look like our modern fluorescent light tubes. Obviously, the flying saucer types are spoken of more common, but they're just huge numbers of cylindrical column types of UFOs that are seen that look cloud-like during the day and glow in the dark. They're sometimes called cloud cigars. Imagine that you're a 21st century person and you go back in time 3,000 years to the Exodus. Once the pillar of cloud and fire gets the Jews through the Red Sea and then onto Mount Sinai, and the Ten Commandments are given, and the tabernacle, the house of worship, is built. The pillar of cloud then hovers above the tabernacle during the rest of the journey. And when it's time to move on, when the pillar of cloud moves on, they take down their tent, which is the house of worship, and all the Jewish tents are taken down, and they move on and set up a new camp somewhere else. Now, here's a description from Exodus chapter 33, beginning at about verse 7. Now, Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, meaning the tabernacle, the house of worship, the tent of worship, was set apart from where the individual tents were, where the families lived. Anyway, he set it up far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose up, and every man stood at the tent door and looked after Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the door of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the door of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, every man at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. Now, I would think that if any 21st century person would fly back somehow in 3,000 years and be there to see this, what they would report back here and on a radio show like this, well, I saw a UFO is hovering above this big tent. It moved to position to drop down to the ground to the door of the tent, and Moses came out and seemed to be talking to some guy in the UFO. That's the way we describe it. Now, of course, biblical scholars had no idea what this thing was. They understand that a being in it is treated as the Lord. I think we can understand that 3,000 years ago, any kind of power like this would, in fact, be treated in a godlike way, and that's what we have here. So that's my understanding of what we're dealing with here. Then, when you get to the Red Sea, the pillar of cloud leads the Jews up to the Red Sea, which seems like a bad mistake because the Egyptians are following with their chariots. When we get to chapter 14 in Exodus, beginning at verse 19, basically I'll summarize the story, not read it. The pillar of cloud goes from in front of Israel to the rear and settles on the ground behind the Jewish army to keep the army of Egypt away until it gets dark. Then under the cover of darkness, it moves directly over the Red Sea. And I believe it uses its power system, whatever it is, whether it be an anti-gravitational field, something like that. And the walls of water then appear. During the night, they feel a strong east wind blowing, and I think that's an accurate report. It's not what caused the parting, but it's the result of the force field being used, and it's blowing out the end. They're on the western shore of the Red Sea, moving toward the east, so they had an east wind right in their face. I believe if they'd been on the other shore, they would have reported a west wind blowing. In any case, once the walls of water are in place, and I believe modern UFOs, whatever their energy system, has a drying effect, almost a microwave effect. So the seabed was dry when the Jews crossed. When the Jews crossed, they got safely to the other side, and they were probably saying prayers of thanks, thank you, God, for saving us from the Egyptians. And everybody's happy until they look back and see the Egyptians coming in after them and with their chariots. And their prayers of thanksgiving quickly changed to prayers of, oh my gosh, look what's happening. We're going to be killed anyway. Mm-hmm. Suddenly the Lord in the pillar of cloud and of fire looked down upon the Egyptians and discomfited the host of the Egyptians, either breaking off their chariot wheels or freezing up their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And then Moses raised his hands and the walls of water collapsed and the Egyptians were drowned. Now, I find a section in there where it says that the Lord looked down very interesting because most of us in our memory of the Red Sea story remember the part about Moses raising his hands and the walls of water falling on the Egyptians.
Right.
Here's a detail. It just doesn't need to be in the story. Why did they remember this? But it's in there, And so something happened. Something came from the pillar of cloud and fire, which is directly above the open sea channel. The Lord looked down. They couldn't see anything happen. It was an invisible thing. It was like a glancing blow, as it were. And something happened to the Egyptian chariot wheels. Now, I've kind of had an argument with another Old Testament person about this. He's determined that they were stuck in the mud, but the text says 3 times that they crossed on dry ground. Okay, and furthermore, the text says the power that caused the wheels to do whatever they did came from above, from the Lord's look down. What happened to the chariot wheels? 2 things are possible. One interpretation of the Hebrew is that the wheels were actually broken off. If you look in the Revised Standard Version and look at the footnotes, that's one suggestion. The other suggestion is that for some reason they locked up or froze up. This is an interesting possibility, too, because modern UFOs often give off a tremendous amount of heat, especially if you get close to them. And if some type of beam technology were used there, and by the way, beam technology has been reported in connection with some of our nuclear weapons silos. But in any case, let's just say a beam technology was involved. The chariot wheels would have axles that were made of metal, and they would have hubs that were made of metal. And they would be perhaps greased so that they would turn easily, but in any case, it would not take a lot of heat to expand both the hubs and the axles in such a way that suddenly the wheels wouldn't turn anymore, and then they would be locked up. One Jewish translation of this section of the Exodus story that I read translated the thing as they locked them up. So it's either they locked them up or they broke them off with some kind of special force. In any case, this is my interpretation of the parting of the Red Sea. I think it's a really important story for us to pay attention to because of the details here. The environmental impact is what I call it.
Now, you raised a question there, and this always comes up about the Bible, whether you're talking about something like this or just interpreting the Bible and just keeping the UFO piece out of it. And I think it would be one of the more difficult things. But you've studied at an extremely high level. You have decades of experience. How do you account for the various translations, and how do you make sure that you're looking at the best representation of what was actually met? Because that would seem to maybe muddy the waters a bit. How do you deal with that?
Well, we've had hundreds, thousands of people working to try to make the Bible as accurate as possible. And of course, there are multiple manuscripts from which the scholars work, and they have a process by which they try to sort out which manuscripts are likely the most reliable and least likely to have errors. The further back the manuscript goes, the more likely you are to have an accurate manuscript. Furthermore, if you have 3 or 4 manuscripts from different sources, maybe different countries even, but they all say the same thing, that's good. You go with that. If 2 manuscripts have one reading and the other 3 manuscripts have a different reading, maybe you go with the 3, but you put a footnote in the Bible and say 2 other manuscripts say blah blah blah. Well, that's kind of how it goes. I don't do what I would call original research work on the manuscripts myself. I work with what's the best available that we have at this time.
The implications for today. Now, we've talked a lot about the past. Do you believe that the same ETs and aliens that made themselves known in the Bible, in your view, are still doing so today?
Yes. Let's start 100 years back. 100 years ago this past Friday. 100 years ago this past Friday was the Roman Catholic miracle of Fatima, Portugal. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but Anybody wants to look it up. It's very interesting, both from a religious point of view and a UFO point of view. It involved 3 children at the beginning. On the 13th of the month, I believe it was in May, it started, and a being in a ball of light came and lit above a tree and spoke to them and told them this being would be visiting them on the 13th of the month for the next, basically 6 months or 5 months. A big uproar came about. Lucia was the older of the 3 children. The other 2 children were kind of cousins. They began telling the story to the family. Lucia's family thought she was lying. Eventually, they got put in jail for causing an uproar and disturbing the peace. In any case, on the 13th of October, 1917, 50,000 people were at Fatima to see whatever it was to be seen. And what it was is it was raining at the time, and then Lucy looked up and pointed at the sky, and the clouds parted, and a silver disc descended from the sky and lit up the ground and began spinning, and spinning light off in many directions. And then it stopped spinning, and then started spinning again, and stopped, and did it 3 times, kind of a nod to the Trinity maybe. But in any case, then it kind of wobbled its way down toward the Earth. A lot of times people describe a falling leaf trajectory from UFOs because if they're not going at high speed, they may have trouble staying in a flat trajectory. In any case, the clothing of the people would have been wet from the rain, dried out from this. They could look at the light and not get their eyes burned like they would in the sun. And then it lasted about 10 minutes and went away. So this eventually became a certified Catholic miracle. Catholics have a board that looks into miracles. I'm a Presbyterian. We Presbyterians don't have such a board, and I'm sorry that that's true. But in any case, I think that probably the Pope knows that what was described as something like a flying saucer before we had flying saucers as an issue fits in very well with what are described now as flying saucers. And from my point of view, we are quite vulnerable. I think a flying saucer could land at a football stadium anytime or a baseball stadium. And even if the United States government told the TV station they couldn't broadcast this, you'd have 50,000 cell phones there to record it, and that would blow up the government lie very quickly. So, we're here. We're dealing with the government covering it up. I have seen the thing on YouTube. It's a collection of things. Jimmy Fallon, I think, does a talk show in which President Obama is on TV with him being questioned. The first thing Jimmy says is, if I were president, the first thing I would do would be to demand to know what's going on with UFOs. And President Obama laughs and says, that's why you'll never be president. And then
I think that was Kimmel. I think that was Kimmel.
Oh, Kimmel, you're right. It is Jimmy Kimmel. You're right. It is Jimmy Kimmel. Thank you. Jimmy Kimmel. In any case, then he says, what did you find out when you were president about UFOs? And President Obama says, I can't tell you. And then Jimmy Kimmel says, well, I had President Clinton on, and I asked him the same thing. And he said, well, I looked into it, and I didn't find anything. And President Obama says, that's what they tell us to say. So that's what we're dealing with here. They have the reasons for not wanting to release the information they have. If it were released, the kind of things that I've been talking about would go quickly from weird and impossible to we better look at this.
I've got to say that if you would read the dry text of what was said in that interview, you'd have a very different perception than the way it was done, because President Obama was very, very smart in the way that he did it, assuming that the government is hiding anything, because he didn't say anything that was incorrect, but he said it in a laughing tone like, well, that's why you'll never be president, haha. But the thing is, if you read the dry text, it takes on quite a different character, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I respect what he did with it, because I'm sure he signed a non-disclosure statement in order to get his pension, and he's under clear orders that he's not to talk about this at all. And he was supposed to say, I looked into it and I didn't find anything. Instead, he said, I can't tell you. And that, to me, it represents honesty and courage, and I respect him very much for that.
Now, here's the question, 2 questions. Why do you think the government is hiding all this? And here's the second point. We tend to think of the president as our highest official, the ultimate governmental authority in the United States. Now, what you're saying kind of puts the implication there that there's someone higher than the president. So those are my 2 questions. What are they hiding, and who exactly is hiding if it goes higher than the president? Who would that be?
Well, if you've heard of Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel's book AD After Disclosure,
yes,
they basically say there's essentially a secret government on a world basis that's handling the UFO situation, and they're sharing UFO secrets, most of which are technological in nature and all that. And I think that's entirely possible. And I think that the way in which the world would go at the UFO situation is to try to milk the cow for all they can, technologically and financially. And if they saw religious dimensions to this, that'd be the last thing they'd want people to know about. The last thing they want people to think is that there's a higher power that's judging everybody on Earth, and that when we die, we get judged, and where we end up depends on how we've done with what we are, They don't want that kind of information floating around. They don't want UFOs here confirming it. So it's a dangerous thing to let people know there's a higher power out there, and we're not it. The second part of your question, when Donald Rumsfeld was Secretary of Defense, he said there's something like $2.3 trillion of money that can't be accounted for.
Yeah, the black budget.
Pardon?
The black budget? Is that what you're talking about? Or
well,
just
yes.
Okay.
Well, who knows? All I can say is it's not accounted for. But $2 trillion, $2.3 trillion, that's quite a bit of money. Stephen Greer, in his book Unacknowledged, says that with all that money available, there's money available not only for technology, but to bribe people to keep their mouths shut, people in key positions. So in terms of the money that's available for this, what you might call a satellite government that's invisible to control things, the money's there. That's what Stephen Greer would say.
What are your thoughts on, if Jesus was an alien, is an alien, we talk about the second coming. Is he coming back, and are things getting to such a point in the world, many people believe, of maybe more mainline faith or people who don't really look at the alien UFO question in regard to it, but they think that there's a second coming very shortly because the world is going to, pardon the expression, hell in a handbasket. What are your thoughts on the second coming?
Okay, I'm not good at predictions much. Okay, and so I have no idea when and how the curtain's going to be drawn down on human history. But there's quite a bit of evidence that the God of the Bible is quite willing to let us stew in our own juice, and for a long time. After all, the Jews are slaves in Egypt for, 400 years or something like that. They didn't start out as slaves, but it got to be that. And when you read in Exodus about how long it took for the plagues to finally get Pharaoh to let Israel go, I mean, it goes on forever. And so the timeline of God and ours are quite different. I certainly do think the times we're in are scary. The cartoon looking at his cell phone, and it was like a blast just coming out in his face. And it says 2017 so far with the heading over the cartoon, you know. I don't know. I just think that it's too bad about the government covering up the UFO situation, but at the same time, you know, religious people are supposed to think about signs of sky in the sky. They should be thinking about angels and whether or not some things like the pillar of cloud and fire that's in the Exodus might be an angelic sign, and we might be getting similar signs now. So it's not. I'm not blaming it all on the government. There's a certain kind of blindness in the religious community now, and I've found it in the way I've been treated for the work I've been doing. I mean, nobody's happy I'm doing this, and I think God would be mad at me if I weren't doing it. So that's kind of where I'm caught, you know.
Is that why you decided to do this book after, you know, having done your previous book, and it sounds like a bit of a hiatus in regards to published work? Why did you decide to do this book at this time?
Well, it's not like I've been doing nothing for the last 49 years. You know, I've written over 50 articles, many for the MUFON UFO Journal. By and large, I'm too religious for secular publishers, and neither liberal or conservative Christian publishers like what I'm doing. So it really narrows down my publishing options, and I consider it a near miracle that the Bible and Flying Saucers got published to begin with. I mean, it was pretty radical for 1968. In terms of now, I was glad to do it. Tim Beckley offered to do it. I was glad he did. You know, I'm 79, just turned 79 Saturday. My time here, I think, is limited. I think eventually the kind of things I've been saying are going to be discussed widely, provided the world doesn't come to an end soon. But I think that the things I'm dealing with need to be dealt with, and I wanted to leave kind of information or proof of what was on my mind. And if this thing, you know, if the UFO truth comes out, we'll say 20 years from now, and I'm long gone, I want some kind of witness to what I stood for.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating. A great discussion. Our guest has been Reverend Doctor, I never get that right, Barry H. Downing. We're so glad to have had him on the program. Reverend Downing, where can people find the book?
Go to Amazon and type in Biblical UFO Revelations, and there you'll be.
Well, the book, again, is Biblical UFO Revelations. Did Extraterrestrial Powers Cause Ancient Miracles? And Reverend Downing, thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thanks to be here, Jim.
Well, thank you for tuning in to the Paranormal Podcast. We certainly appreciate it this holiday season as you're supping with family and friends, and maybe, you know, the tales turn spooky because there, you know, there's that line in It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year about spooky ghost stories. So if you start talking about ghost stories at your Christmas party, don't let them forget about the Paranormal Podcast and Jim Harold's Campfire. Perhaps you can subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts. That helps us greatly. Or you might want to download our free app, Jim Harold Spooky Studio, available for iOS, Android, and Apple. And yes, and Amazon is what I should have said there. I'm looking forward to my vacation. I'm starting to lose it. But regardless, we're going to keep pushing through and producing the content all month long. And we thank you so much for listening. I hope you're having a great holiday season. And we'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to jimharold.com, and thanks for listening.